Welcome back. Well, the big question now is, where do we go from here? The history has been put on display for a greater number of people outside of the Indigenous community. I took those tough questions to some of our political leaders.
The Canadian government and the United States government, and the states for that matter, because the Thomas Indian School was a state-run school, have to come clean, and they have to be truthful about this. They have to be able to tell what happened and take responsibility for their part in this part of history.
Well, I think there needs to be justice, and I think it's very important that we follow the lead of the Seneca Nation of Indians, who have been so detrimentally impacted over the course of history.
State Senator Tim Kennedy chairs the state's Native American Relations Committee. He sent this letter of support to the Seneca Nation.
It's our obligation to ensure that justice is served, and so my outreach to the Seneca president was offering our assistance in any way possible.
What are you going to do in Albany to see that through?
Actually, right now what we're watching is the investigation happening at the federal government level.
Kennedy is talking about an investigation launched in June by Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, herself a Native American.
I think that's the reason, one of the major reasons why Deb Haaland was selected as Interior Secretary. She's a colleague of mine, a friend, and I think that the Biden administration recognizes that this issue is not new. It's been around for a century and a half. What is new is a recognition that something needs to be done about it.
Do you think reparations in some way, shape, or form are on the table?
I think everything's on the table.
Is that something that could and should happen?
I think so. I think our people need to be have the United States and New York State have to respect our people and what has happened and make it right.
Before there's justice, there's accountability.
And former Seneca Nation President Dennis Bowen remains skeptical that anything of substance will come out of the investigation, either at the federal or the state level. Senator, we're talking about an attempted ethnic cleansing. Now, the Thomas School itself, that was run by the state. Is there anyone to hold accountable for that?
Well, I think we start with the federal investigation. The fact that the Thomas School is part of an investigation at the federal level with 350 schools is definitely heartening. This is an investigation that is just beginning.
And people talk about apologies now. Well, if America apologized to our people, that'll make it better. There's still injustice.
And the other part of this equation is also healing.
I grew up in the Tuscarora Nation territory outside of Niagara Falls until I was 6 years old. And then at that time, my family moved out to California.
Peter Hill didn't know why. He just knew he didn't like it.
I had a kind of a resentment towards my parents because they took us away from Tuscarora Nation. I never grew up as a boy on the reserve, never got to play lacrosse as a kid, didn't know any of my cousins, I kind of resented that I felt almost like I was kidnapped by my own parents.
But as an adult, he reached a better understanding.
Well, I knew my mother went to Thomas Indian School. I never really talked to her about it, what it meant and what she went through it, because when I was growing up, I really didn't know too much about it. She was taught that there's a better way of life to take her family to move away from the reservation, that they would have a better economic and educational outlook for the future.
As he learned about the residential school program, he gained insight into why his parents moved him.
Now I am doing what I'm kind of like my life path is supposed to be, what my purpose is, or what my intent is to help people understand these issues, to promote healing and overcome the historical traumas.
In 1992, his life path brought him to work here at Native American Community Services, or NACS, a nonprofit agency founded in 1975 to provide quality health and social services to the off-reservation Native American population in Erie and Niagara counties. Executive Director Michael Martin says in 2006, NACS conducted a health survey that really opened their eyes.
The top health priority was alcoholism and substance use. And that wasn't necessarily new information to us. We kind of suspected that.
What surprised them was the root that they discovered.
I had asked the group, how much does boarding schools have to do with our high rates of alcoholism and substance use and abuse? And this one elder said, yeah, it does. I can't remember exactly how and what she said, but she said it quickly and she stopped talking.
So in 2008, they conducted their first healing circle dedicated to the issue of boarding schools, and it was like a door opening.
And our room was full, and a lot of tears were shed that day because we started to see that we heard things like, well, now I know why my parents or why my dad couldn't tell me he loved me, or why, my mom couldn't hug me. It's because they didn't get that as kids in those schools. In fact, they got abused mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, sexually.
I've personally heard elders talk about some of the most horrible things that no child should ever go through.
They continued to hold listening and healing sessions and even attend conferences.
We were at a conference out in Seattle, and there's an elder talking about, as a 5-year-old boy, being raped by 8 grown men.
And as we started to hear more of those stories and unwind it, we can clearly see the intergenerational impact and how it was playing out.
Martin says that they have found that even though it's been decades since the last school had closed, the cycle of trauma continues and even impacted the way Native people view themselves.
As they see the same issues in their parents, grandparents, maybe aunties, uncles, cousin, and think that's just who they are.
That's one thing that we've known and have learned. A lot of people who went through boarding schools, if they were traumatized, either they rarely acknowledge it, and sometimes they never acknowledge it. They basically go to their graves without understanding or letting go of the trauma, or sometimes they minimize it.
So much of the focus today here at NACS is to raise awareness of what happened, let victims understand that they are not alone, and turn to their own culture and teaching to promote healing.
And so the part of the approach is not only raising that awareness and telling them this is not who you have to be, but then when they ask what should I be, it's also then bringing back sort of those traditional teachings that were always given to us, intended to keep us healthy and well. And so restoring what we call ganaquio or ganagohio, the good mind, is a concept of personal power and health and well-being, but has a ripple effect out to those around them, their family, and into their community. And we're trying to reroute people back into those original teachings as a way forward to help them not only understand and deal and cope, but build that resiliency back into our people.
Well, the good news is that people are talking about what needs to be done to help the Native American community move forward from this and to heal. The bad news is there is still so much work that needs to be done. Well, thank you for joining me for this special edition of Channel 2 News. Have a good night.